All right, guys. So obviously, we're just talking about the offensive line, and I wanted to make one quick point before we got to the Seth McLaughlin audio. I I just wonder what the disconnect is with the guys they bring in and the style they play, because like I look at Michigan and what they've done the last 3 years, and they've kind of seamlessly identified the offensive linemen that fit their brand of football best. And I don't know if this is all a byproduct of having more of a high-powered offense, but I think there's this idea, and maybe I'm wrong on this, maybe they're just picking the wrong guys, which is entirely possible. I don't see enough ass kickers and name takers on the offensive line for Ohio State. And I think that's a big thing. I think that's an attitude thing as much as it is a style thing. And so there's a part of me where that cynicism is, well, I think the O-line is actually probably closer to average by the end of the season. The problem is, stylistically, do you have enough guys that move other guys off the spot on the defensive line and basically control the line of scrimmage? Because, again,
Yeah.
whether it's
Yeah.
style, whether it's what they're asked to do, whether it's the players themselves, that's the part where it's tough for me to look and go, oh, they'll just rebuild. And this year, when I say rebuild, I mean they'll just build off what they did last year, and this year they'll be a monster O-line.
It's a fair point in that sometimes it's just an identity thing. Like if that's not part of this group's identity, how do you fix that? And I think the portal is an obvious answer. In a couple weeks when that reopens after the spring game, maybe that's a place you find those guys. If it's something that they're still concerned about, I do think there's kind of a finesse feel to the guys that Ohio State's brought in on the offensive line of late in recent years. I think that's why Justin Fry has been kind of called into question as the offensive line coach of late, but it seems like Ohio State is kind of standing by him and backing him. I also think too, Nick, assuming again, and we've had the conversation 20 times over, assuming Will Howard is your starting quarterback, that's a guy who, because he's gonna want to run the football more so than what you did with, say, CJ Stroud and even this year with Kyle McCord, like you need an offensive line that is going to be able to be more bruising and sort of get downfield and create opportunities for a guy like Will Howard to run the football. And I don't think that should be understated either. Like you want those types of players for a quarterback of the skill set that you have potentially starting for you this year. So maybe that's another reason why I say they maybe wanted to see how it looked with this group and Will Howard, and now they're kind of going to assess it in this next transfer portal window. I don't know that for sure, but I do think that's another interesting element to all this is you talk about having these bruising, name taker offensive linemen. I think you almost need that in an offense that's going to be run by a quarterback who wants to be able to run the football. Like this isn't CJ Stroud. This isn't Kyle McCord who's going to stand. And CJ Stroud technically shouldn't have only been standing in the pocket. Like I think we saw in that Georgia game in the semifinals. He can run the football. And we saw it in his rookie year in the NFL. Ryan Day, just for whatever reason, didn't want to utilize that part of his skill set. So maybe that could have been something you did more if you had the offensive line for it. And so I think that's an important note about this team moving forward as well.
Yeah, so I do want to play, or we should play the Seth McLaughlin sound by Ryan Day. Obviously, Seth McLaughlin had, and it's funny, we point to the Michigan game in the playoffs where he was having snapping problems and kind of communication issues with Jalen Milroe, the Alabama quarterback. But if you really kind of like hear Alabama fans, the snapping problems have been an issue for Seth McLaughlin during his time in Alabama pretty much all of last year as well. So we're going to play. This is Ryan Day kind of answering that and how Seth McLaughlin has looked in practice.
A little early. Again, I could probably tell you more as we head into, probably next week. But, Seth's snaps have been great. I know that was a little bit of a concern. I think that had a lot to do with maybe the cadence or whatever, but so far he's been doing great. Carson, for the most part, I don't think there was one issue with the snaps today. So that's critical. And then, now they both have experience, so that's great. And then trying to figure out who the best five is will be important. But we'll evaluate it once we get on. You don't know about offensive linemen until the pads are on. You just don't. Today was a padded practice, but it was on and off for a reason. And then as we get, some inside drill going, a few other things, we'll get a better idea. But they both have had good off seasons and good approaches.
So All right. I'm not saying Ryan Day's wrong. What I am saying is when we just go to something on that end. Okay, that's a big ask considering that I think center has become the second most important spot on the offensive line if it hasn't always been.
I think it's also important to know that like it was an issue all year. Like if it was strictly just a cadence thing, I would imagine, especially Nick Saban being as detailed as he is, that's something he would have worked out by the time the college football playoff rolled around. So for it to still be an issue from like the beginning of the season on till late in the season, I don't know that I just buy wholeheartedly it was just a cadence thing. And again, like lump that into the concerns along the offensive line if you want. The fact that Seth McLaughlin maybe hasn't been as successful or had some miscues snapping the football. But it ultimately, like, I think Seth McLaughlin's a fine player. I think he's a good center. I just think when you're missing the snaps, that's obviously the biggest no you can have at that position. So you have to get that sorted out. And that's what this time is supposed to be used for. Like, it's up to Ryan Day, Justin Fry, this coaching staff to make sure if it really was just a cadence issue, that you don't have the same problem here at Ohio State, or else we're going to be sitting there saying, okay, we like all the warning signs were there. Why was this the one guy that you went and got in the portal, and then he's just screwing up offensive series because he can't get the ball to the quarterback?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like where we are with this and where we're going to be with this is I think it doesn't matter until it matters. And then when it matters, this could really matter in a way that, like, again, I'm not trying to be too melodramatic, but Ryan Day could be basing his career off a center we've already seen struggle with snapping the ball and on like the most important possible scenario, which is in the national crowd watching the playoffs. So
yeah, I mean,
I think it's something that bears to have in the back of your mind, even if it's not something that we need to panic about yet.
Yeah, it's the reason why we remember the snap in the Michigan game, but people don't necessarily recall all the ones he messed up during the season. He actually messed up the snap on the Hail Mary that Milroe threw to beat Auburn like a couple weeks prior, if people remember. Like, that was a bad snap by him as well, and then Milroe kind of had to improvise, chucked it up, and they miraculously won that game, which would have obviously changed the entire landscape of the playoff if that had gone differently. So that's kind of interesting. But you're right. Like, it's those stages that he was messing up on. And so those ones stand out in our mind, and that's your concern, right? You get to the college football playoff, and then it's an issue that's costing you a win on the biggest stage. I know we're going to talk about the spring game being broadcast here in a second. How much of is that one of the things that you're going to be paying attention to in that spring game? Because Ryan Day just said it in that clip, like, it's hard to tell with offensive linemen until you get the pads on. Like, it's kind of a different game. Okay, well, pads are going to be on. This is your first opportunity to kind of go live. I understand they're not going like full speed everything. It's a scrimmage, but they're not trying to kill each other. But this is kind of the first like real game scenario for him as an Ohio State Buckeye. How much is that something that you'll be watching in detail in terms of what he does during the spring game?
I mean, the O-line will end up being the most important thing, and just watching how they handle this defensive line. And again, the defensive line does not necessarily attack the way that we even saw like Michigan under Jesse Minter attack, but like, yeah, McLaughlin was the guy. So whether it's fair or not, all those other guys have been here. I kind of feel like we know what level they play at. So it's going to stand out a lot. If and it's not just McLaughlin. I think Hinsman's probably in this conversation as well. If either guy struggles, and that's just because new quarterback, you need this to be pretty seamless. You mentioned the spring game. We did get the announcement. It's going to be broadcast on Fox on April 13th. So what's so notable about this, Spencer, is it's not just that it's going to be on Fox. Fox has actually handled previous spring games, usually for Ohio State, but this is going to be on the network. It's not going to be on Fox Sports. It's not going to be, our Fox Sports 1. This is going to be on the big dog on Fox itself. And you add to it a week later, Michigan on the 20th. Same thing's going to be said of that. Kind of a really cool moment. You can kind of see how there's an opportunity here to make spring games and kind of grow spring games into something even more important.
Yeah, I honestly, my first reaction, to be honest with you, Nick, was this is the first game being like the first spring game, I should say, being broadcast on one of the actual, like, the network for Fox or whatever. Like, I was stunned by that because and again, I don't know. I mean, I follow college football. I guess I hadn't necessarily picked up on the fact that like a team like Bama or a team like USC or Georgia or whatever had never had a spring game of their own on one of these networks. Like, I would have thought that just would have happened by now, because my galaxy brain is always thinking of, okay, what's the next way for them to make money? What's the next thing that they can put on TV? And clearly this is it, right? Like, this is the start of now the lane becoming, well, let's put our spring game on the network because it's football and we crave football and we don't have football this time of year. So it gives us a way to kind of put ourselves out there, market ourselves on one of the big national networks. So smart. It's a cool move. Like you alluded to, one of the reasons why I think and it makes sense that Ohio State gets to be one of the teams, if not the team, blazing the path for this, obviously. But yeah, I was just kind of stunned by the fact that we had never seen a game put on one of these big time networks, like the actual channel, up until this point.
I would like to see, if Fox is going to do this, and I think it's totally cool, and they're going to bring Joel Klatt. I would assuming they're going to bring, most of their A crew for this. And I hope that's the goal. I'd love to see a national broadcast and a local broadcast, meaning all right, like Fox, we're going to give you Urban, we're going to give you Mark Ingram, we're going to give you, all the big names. And then on like Big Ten Network, give me an all Buckeye cast. And what I was thinking about is like, give me one of the Big Ten Network anchors, but then give me like 2 or 3 Buckeye players. And I was saying, like, even like my co-host, Dustin Fox, like bring in, Joey Galloway, bring in a couple
wait,
people.
Do you want this to almost be like, there's the national one on Fox, that's like think of it like ESPN Monday Night Football. There's the Joe Buck and Troy Aikman, and then there's the Manning cast. Like, you want the Big Ten to almost do like a Manning cast type thing?
Yeah. I mean, a little less personality based, but definitely like, maybe not, because the Manning cast is a hit or miss for me. I definitely want it to be centered around the game instead of just like, hey, we're going to focus on this game, and here's a really cool audible that I'm going to call out, and then here's 5 minutes on Mark Wahlberg, why he fucking hates and doesn't want to be here. But yeah, I mean, something closer to a spring broadcast, but with a little bit of flair in there. I do like that. But basically, it's just a secondary look at this, because most non-Ohio State fans are going to want to watch this game, don't want to hear Buckeyes talk about Ohio State football, right? Because it's going to be a little Ohio State-y. It's going to be a little bit nose in the air, right? And so that's what the national – and here's the thing. Yeah. I think there are fans who could have them on both TVs and just mute one side, mute the other. I just think –
if there's like a guest you really want to hear from – who, like an Ohio State legend who's showing up. Maybe Eddie George shows. Probably not Eddie George, but if he did, like, I want to hear what he has to say. Or Cardale Jones shows up. I want to hear what he has to say, and then you can just flip back or whatever. Yeah, I think that's a cool idea. That's probably a cool way to do it.
I think the most important thing is right now they make sure that this national broadcast gets as many eyes on it as possible, and I really hope they, you kind of mentioned the Manning cast. I think there's some space between the Manning cast and traditional broadcast. And it starts with me on who's the broadcasters. I think that the fatal flaw with a lot of TV presenters and play-by-play guys is they're not strong in personality-driven situations, or they're kind of averse to public, to opinions. So the problem with that becomes, if you only have one guy to bounce off of, you're kind of locked into however forthcoming that person is. Whereas if you let them play true point guard, so basically you've got a studio crew that's handling the game, Does it make sense? Like, all right, I'm the point guard. I'll say what's going on in the field, and then I'm going to bounce between the three superstar analysts that we have, between Brady Quinn, Mark Ingram, and oh gosh, who was the guy I already mentioned? Oh, Urban Meyer. Something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a good way to go about it. And I do agree that the Manning cast sometimes can be a little like caricature-y. Like it just becomes about the Mannings more so than like the guest you're having on. And I agree with that. But I mean, I think that would be an awesome way to set it up. Why do you think, like, I guess I'm just curious, what do you think triggered this to be the year that this happened? Because like I said, I would have thought it would have happened by now. Do you think it's just like par for the course, like the evolution of it? Or do you think there's like an actual behind the scenes reason as to why it's happening?
I can't think to a behind the scene reasons. Do you have one?
I mean, this is going down like the conspiracy theory rabbit hole a little bit, but I just kind of wondered if it was like another but another like, well, let's get one over on Michigan because everyone's talking about Michigan. Like, oh, they won the national championship. They're the belle of the ball right now. Everyone's talking about them. Everyone's up, wondering where JJ McCarthy is going to go in the draft and all this different stuff. Here's our chance to kind of seize back attention on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Let's be the first team to put a spring game on like the network for Fox.
I think
too far down the rabbit hole.
I think that's a very interesting theory, Spencer. I think that was really good.
Yeah, right. You think I'm full of shit?
A little bit. I think it's. I don't listen. I think it. I don't think Fox.
This program, like, I think Ryan Day on some level is. I mean, I get what you're saying. Like, Fox probably isn't like thinking about it that way. I just think Ohio State sometimes thinks about it that way. Like, especially Ryan Day. Like, he is trying his damnedest to get one over on Michigan finally and like finally get that win that's eluded him the last 3 years. And so the idea to like, well, let's make sure that we're out in front of them again and we're still the team being talked about and all these different things. Like, I don't know. Sometimes my mind runs with that type of stuff, but I understand where it's not the best theory ever. It was just a thought.
What's your best conspiracy theory on why Fox is nationally broadcasting the Ohio State spring game, the first ever nationally televised spring game, as it were? But speaking of trying to get one over on your rival, Jim Harbaugh is not letting it go. That's next, but first, a quick word from our sponsors.